I want to ask you this, and I hate to rewind a little bit, but I want to go back to the recomping that we were talking about. And since you work with so many athletes that you do recomps with, the one of the biggest things is the training volume and the training that they're doing, but then also the amount of food that they intake, whether it's slight surplus or whether it's at maintenance. But how do you help athletes get to the mind of being patient with their recomp? Because a recomp isn't something where you're visually seeing changes all the time, or you're even seeing changes on the scale all the time. For myself, I've been around the same weight range for 3 years now. And I'm also curious about your ideas on DEXA scans, because I've heard you talk about DEXA scans before, but I've been able to make training gains through the years, and I've been able to gain a small amount of muscle, get leaner, but gain a little bit of muscle these past 3 years. And it's been a very slow process. How do you get athletes to focus on their gym performance rather than focusing on how their body looks every single month?
Yeah, that's a good point. You already basically touched on the most important thing, that is not to go just by the mirror, and definitely not go just by your body weight. Because a big mistake I very often see on successful programs, when people, especially if they're not used to optimizing all their nutrition and their training and everything, they start with me and then they freak out, they're not losing weight. And then I say, well, look at your waist measurements, look at your caliper measurements, look at your gym performance. You know, you're getting stronger, your caliper readings are going down, your waist is getting slimmer. This is exactly what we want. Like, I can get you lean at 200 pounds, or I can get you lean at 140 pounds. Like, I think you want 200, right? Mm-hmm. So lack of weight loss, if you see good fat loss on objective measurements, and I think calipers and waist circumference are the most practical for most people, then that's good. That's what you want. Like, if you want to recomp, then you don't want to lose weight. So that's basically an ideal scenario if you're not losing weight. Now, for many people, there will be changes, and they may be gradual and slow, but still you want to measure this. So you need objective markers that you're tracking. Your gym performance is a big one, and I think waist, caliper readings, and weight, those are the things I track with almost all clients. If you have access to DEXA scans, that's great, but ideally you then need them every week.
Ooh.
So that's going to be expensive for most people. So, and then actually radiation is probably not a concern, but it might be over the very long run. So for most people, I think DEXA is more of a nice thing to know, or a verification of your long-term progression, rather than something that you really use as your benchmark of whether to adjust your calories. Because you don't want to wait a month every time, or a month is a good scenario for most people, right? So you don't want to wait a month before you adjust your calories. If you find that you're truly not losing fat anymore, then you want to go down in calories right now. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of effort just to get maintenance.
So I actually track my calories. Mark and Nsima, they don't they don't have to anymore. But sometimes I'll lean on some of the like If It Fits Your Macros videos on YouTube and stuff, and majority of them focus just on the macros. Nobody really talks about micros. But if you're completely ignoring that side of things, what's some of the, I guess, what's the detriment that it can have on you if you're, eating protein powder all day long to hit your protein goal, and then you know what I mean? Like, what could some of the drawbacks be from not really considering some of the micronutrients?
Yeah, that's hard to say at this point, but I think they will be significant. And I think if I look at my clients where I clean up their diet, I do see benefits. And they're not major in terms of energy intake. For example, you may see, well, maybe they can consume 100, 200 extra calories. There is one study that actually measured the thermic effect of food and found that it was twice as large when they were eating. Funny enough, they called them whole foods, but it was bread and cheese. So, like, guys, you know that doesn't walk around, right? Bread and cheese in the wild. But so it was whole grain bread and less processed cheese compared to sort of the American cheddar-like cheese and white bread. And even that already made like a 10% difference. So that over the course of a whole day would be a 10% difference in energy intake. Now, of course, nobody eats only processed food, especially not fit people. But it will make a few percent difference in energy intake. And if you look at studies on muscle growth and performance, we have pretty good data on vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, iron, calcium, and some more tentative data on B vitamins, that they actually can improve performance and sometimes muscle growth. And at the very least, deficiency is a real problem. You're deficient in all of those things I just mentioned. You're going to have low testosterone levels. Your recovery is going to be terrible. You're going to feel terrible. You're going to be really tired all the time. You're going to be anemic. So rest interval between sets, those things, they will definitely suffer. But the thing is, those things take a lot of time. You won't see much difference week to week or something. Even vitamin D, if you're correcting a massive vitamin D deficiency, I've found that some people can sort of feel that, but it's still a process of a few weeks. And then they're like, hey, I feel better, and I think it's something's changed. It's like, yeah, you're not deficient in vitamin D anymore.
You were mentioning earlier about cravings. I asked the question, and then you kind of started talking about something slightly different. So, what are some of the strategies that you utilize with cravings and hunger?
So, I think the most important thing with cravings is to realize that it's predicted very well by hunger. So, managing cravings is very much the same as managing hunger. If you're not hungry, you're not going to get a craving. So, a craving is basically hunger that's given shape in your head to a certain food. And in research, probably one of the biggest myths here is this idea that you satisfy a craving and it's gone. And it's kind of like alcohol, where the day afterwards you're hungover, you're like, I'm never going to drink again. And then next week you're drinking. So with McDonald's or something, you get the same effect. I always say that if Saturday is your pancake day, then Sunday to Friday are you thinking about pancake day days, because you're glorifying the cheat food. Whereas if you want to eat pancakes, I say fine, fit it into your macros, and that's where if it fits your macros, works very well. It gives you a lenient way to say, well, if you really want this, you can fit it into your macros. Just make sure your overall diet's still good, and be prepared to probably be hungry, but you'll find that out for yourself, and then you can decide which foods are worth it and which foods are not worth it. And that's what most research finds, that if you don't eat something, that's actually the best way to stop the cravings. I never have McDonald's cravings. In fact, if I walk past the McDonald's, I don't really realize, there's no decision in my mind like, shall I go there? It's not something that crosses my mind. And I think for a lot of people, they actually find that when they they start eating healthier, better food choices, they have a very staple diet, then you can actually see also based on research in their brain that their reward pathways activate more when they eat healthy and less when they eat unhealthy. So you really get accustomed to it.
Got it. I'm really curious about this, and I think you'll have a lot of good insights, since apparently there's been some research on this recently. Keto's been really popular in these past few years. Same with high-fat diets, low carbohydrate diets. But there's still been something within the bodybuilding community where people are very wary of trying to gain muscle while not eating excessive amounts of carbohydrates. Because throughout bodybuilding, everyone's always been like, eat an adequate amount of protein. Okay, eat enough fats and bump up the carbs, right? But apparently there's been some new things that have come out that have shown that individuals that do eat high carbohydrate, gain muscle, but also individuals that are low carb, high fat, also can gain the same amount of muscle in the same fashion. Is that shown to be true at this point, or is there still something to think about there?
I would say so. I think the only indications that low carb diets are inferior for muscle growth are confounded by energy intake. So very often what you see is you put someone on a low carb diet, their energy intake goes down. You put them on a high carb diet, the energy intake either stays the same or it's likely to maybe go up, depending on the choice of carbs. Especially when they think carbs and they think, grains and everything, especially more processed foods, then that racks up a lot of calories. So in most of those studies where you see, lean body mass gains, they're not as good in the low carb group. They're not eating as much and they lose more fat. So this idea, we get this idea where keto is great for fat loss, but not great for muscle growth. And that may be sort of practically true in that, it's for some people, it's hard to eat enough in keto. If you're trying to bulk, if you need to bulk on 5,000 calories, that's going to be tricky in ketosis. Then you're going to be drinking a lot of olive oil or something. And that's, in general, I would say, as soon as your fat intake has to go over your protein intake, you're going to get tricky situations with your diet, because then you need to consume foods that have no protein and no carbs, which means basically oil or butter. So that's sort of the threshold where I think it becomes very impractical to bulk on keto. But other than the practicality, as long as you're controlling for energy intake, I don't think there's a difference in strength development or muscle growth between higher and lower carb diets.
And just so people are clear, like you don't have to do a ketogenic diet. Like you could be lower carbohydrate, because a lot of people that are trying to gain muscle, they're like, oh, I need to eat 300 grams of carbs, 400 grams of carbohydrates. You could be lower carbohydrate, moderate, high fat, still meet the entry requirements and still manage to gain enough muscle, correct? While still obviously intaking enough protein. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, definitely. It's funny enough that most of the research is on ketogenic diets, but recently we had another study on just low carb but not ketogenic versus higher carb, and it also found no difference basically.
It's good to know.
We've been talking a lot about training and training volume. What is kind of a minimal training volume that people need to be able to recomp?
Okay, to be able to recomp, that's very different from sort of you just retain at maintenance or something, because just maintaining is super, super easy.
Yeah.
Like most research finds just like two serious full body workouts per week, you're probably good. Like for free, for sure. So that's easy. But the minimum needed to recomp, that can be much higher, because especially if you're an advanced trainee, then any recomposition at all is very good. That's pretty much optimal results. So then it's actually a pretty high volume. And I think pretty high training volumes can be very effective. Most research finds that if you add volume and you can recover from it, you get better gains. So in that case, the minimum and the optimum are sort of the same. And then you may be talking 20, maybe even 30 sets per week per muscle group.
Oh, some people are scared hearing that, actually. Because most people are trying to chill in the 12 to 20, right? They see those requirements and that's where they stay. But you're talking about 20 to 30 sets. And you're talking about mainly advanced trainees, or is this also like intermediate level athletes? And on that note, how does an athlete know where they are? Just because a lot of athletes, for example, have been training for there's this thing going around with a lot of athletes are training seriously for 2 to 3 years. And they're like, well, this is the most amount of muscle I'm going to be able to gain. Like now it's just everything does slow down, but I'm not going to be able to gain much more here. How can an athlete navigate where they are on that spectrum?
Yeah, that's tricky. I'll start with the last question.
Got it.
And then go to volume. Because for volume, training advancement and they matter a lot. Like the optimum training volume is very different for different individuals. The first, how do you know if you're an advanced individual? Well, you can't just go by your training experience. That's sort of the common approach, right? Well, how many years have you been training? But it doesn't mean anything, because you can spend 10 years dicking around and not achieve anything, and you're still a novice. Like your body only cares about, muscles respond to tension, and they change in structure, and that changes what kind of stimulus they need to change further. If they're not changing structure, then nothing changes. You can spend 10 years in the gym. As long as the muscle's not changing, the optimal volume is not changing. When the muscle gets bigger, generally research finds more advanced trainees can benefit from higher training volumes. So what you want to know is basically sort of percentage-wise where you are in terms of where you could be. That's sort of your training advancement level. And 100% would be your genetic maximum potential, if there is such a thing, because that's actually not 100% clear scientifically. I actually have a calculator on my website where, based on the available data, I give a rough indication of sort of what 100% is, and then what percentage you are for various body parts. It's rough. We don't know. Like the calculator looks at your frame size, which is a significant. If you have big wrists, big ankles, then you can probably put on more muscle mass.
So it's like the FFMI?
It's like the FFMI. If you're starting, FFMI is large already because you have a big frame. And you also see this with most very high-level powerlifters, for example. They have big frames. Like you never see a scrawny but very muscular high-level powerlifter. They're always they have big hands. They're just big guys or women, So that's a very good indication. But then still, you don't know what's happened genetically and everything. We have a lot of research now on that, but it's still scratching the surface of even a full genetic test. We still don't really know how muscular someone can get. There are so many genes and interactions. So yeah, you can get a rough indication. Strength level is probably for most people almost as good. You just measure what your current strength level is. And Mark Whippetoe has actually published some strength standards that I think are very reasonable. They're good guidelines. But then they say, like, if your overhead press is this level is intermediate, this level is advanced, depending on your body weight. I think that's also a good classification. Because over the long run, strength and size correlate pretty well. And it's very practical, you know. It's like a strength test, a one-round test. You can't fake. It's easy. It's practical. So with those two measures, like a rough indication of your fat free mass index and your strength level, you can get a pretty good idea of how advanced